Torah Ohr Elchanan Chabad writes, Kol Yomim Chol Hamoed Pesach Yomim Achronim Shel Yom Tov Kerem is a Hallel ve'in Germ Osei. So we read Hallel, but we don't finish the Hallel. Like Rosh Chodesh, or rather we do like Rosh Chodesh, where we skip the Hallel, where we skip in Hallel. That's also what the Rambam writes. That Rosh Chodashim, Kriyas Hallel, Shnei Yom Pesach, Rosh Chodashim, Kriyas HaMinhag Ve'in Mitzvah. The Rosh Chodesh and the Chol Hamoed Pesach, it's a minhag, it's not a mitzvah. Mitzvah minhag zeh b'tzibur lefichach karim b'dilug ve'im varchalav she'im varchalam minhag. So the Rambam writes that the Chol Hamoed Pesach and Shvi Pesach and also Rosh Chodesh, so that the Kriyas Hallel is minhag and it's not a mitzvah, and therefore, because it's a minhag, therefore we skip it. So the Maggid Mishnah brings down that the Gemara in Erechim explains the reason why Rosh Chodesh is not a mitzvah to read Hallel, because it is not a Yom Tov. It's not called a Moed. He also brings down the source for this minhag in the Gemara Tainus. The Rav went to Bavel on Rosh Chodesh, and he saw that they were reading Hallel, so he was going to stop them. Since it's not the din, since it's not the halacha, since he saw they were skipping, he said, "Okay, they're doing minhag of asayim b'yedayim," and he didn't say anything. Then he brings down the Maggid Mishnah of Achem b'shayim Pesach, that also in the others of Pesach we do it as a minhag. That's Rabbeinu. The Rambam holds lahashvus Chol Hamoed Rosh Chodashim, to compare Chol Hamoed to Rosh Chodesh. V'zen yirah kadas kol mefarshim. That's what all the Mefarshim seem to hold, that Chol Hamoed Pesach and Rosh Chodesh is the same thing, where it's a minhag and you skip it. Chutz ma'Ramban zal, shechalak b'neim, except for the Ramban, which differentiates. For Omar, the Chol Hamoed Pesach, afilu yachin mechuyev l'kroisai. The Ramban holds that Chol Hamoed Pesach, the yachid is mechuyev, is obligated to read a bedilug. She'ikar takana kach haisa l'oimer b'Chol Hamoed bedilug levarach lev. Because the ikar takana was to say it on Chol Hamoed Pesach bedilug, and to make a bracha on it. That's what the Ramban writes. Also, the Beisaysiv, the Torah Ohr Elchanan says the same thing. In Yeshiva Ohr Elchanan, it says Kol Yom Chol Hamoed Shel Achronim Shel Yom Tov Kerem Osei as a Hallel and Germ Osei read Hallel, and we don't read it. And he says Koch Mefurish Be'erichin Perak Beis V'Hasam Yavina Taima My Taima. And the Beisaysiv says so is explicit in Erichin. And over there we give a reason why on Sukkot we finish every day, and on Pesach we don't. What's the reason why it says in Erechim that it says in Erechim, as the Altorah brings down, because Sukkot every day has its own karbonos, while it's mechulek b'karbonosav. Every day is differentiated with its karbonos, so therefore we read each day is not tefillah as the Altorah writes to the first day, and you read the full Hallel, as opposed to Pesach, which is it's not mechulek b'karbonosav, it's all the same karbonos. So therefore, as Altorah writes, it's all tafel for the first Yom Tov. So therefore, you're only obligated to read Hallel on the first day. Shvul leket kosav b'shem medrash adam shein germes Hallel kamei Pesach v'shein v'shinitmu Mitzrayim, and Shvul leket writes that the reason is because the Mitzrayim drowned in it. We'll get back to that later. The Beisaysiv continues, and he says that because he brings down this Rav Maggid, that the Rambam says the reason why we read Hallel b'dilug is because of a minhag, and the Ramban brought down in the Ran says that the reason why we read Hallel b'dilug is because me'ikar din, that's the chiyuv. So it's very strange. What's the reason? So we have over here a machlokes between the Rambam and old Mefarshim, as the Maggid Mishnah says, who says the reason why we read Hallel on Chol Hamoed Pesach and Shvi Pesach is because just a minhag, just like Rosh Chodesh, and that's why we skip. That's why we do a bedilug. And the Ramban, who says that the reason why we read Hallel Chol Hamoed Pesach is because that's mechuyev me'ikar hadin. So everyone agrees that Rosh Chodesh is the reason that it is a minhag. There's a machlokes in regards to Chol Hamoed Pesach. And that's what the Ran brings in Shabbos. He brings down from the Ramban, and he says that when it says in brachas, Yom she'ein gomer b'em Hallel mafsikim, the Yom that you don't read Hallel, you could be mafsik be'emsa perik. So what does it mean, Yomim she'ein gomer Hallel? So he says, according to the most Mefarshim we're going to say, we're talking about Bavel, which has the minhag to read. Ramban the Ramban says, no, you see in Gemara Brachos that there are certain days that there's a chiyuv to read Hallel B'diluk. What's the days that you're mechuyuv to read Hallel B'diluk? That's on Chol Hamoed Pesach. So the Ramban, you have to really understand the Ramban. The Gemara says in Erechin that there's no chiyuv to read on Chol Hamoed Pesach. There's no chiyuv to read Chol Hamoed Pesach. As we said, the reason why you're not supposed to read Chol Hamoed Pesach is because it's not mechulot b'karbonaisa. What does the Ramban mean? That there is a chiyuv. Why would there be a chiyuv? If there is a chiyuv, why isn't there a chiyuv to read the whole thing? What's pshat in a chiyuv to read bediluk? Either there is no chiyuv or there is a chiyuv. What does it mean, pshat to read a chiyuv bediluk? And the question becomes even stronger, as we'll see when we go into the source of what the idea of reading Hallel is. The Ramban l'chera holds that the nusach of reading Hallel, that's not the main mitzvah. That's not the fundamental mitzvah of reading Hallel. The fundamental mitzvah of reading Hallel is the idea of Simchas Yom Tov, of saying Hallel. So the nusach shouldn't make a difference, shouldn't differentiate between when we're talking about the fundamental chiyuv. How is it shy to say that there is a chiyuv, but it's a chiyuv to say Hallel b'diluk? The main chiyuv of Hallel has nothing to do with the nusach of it. Either I have a full chiyuv, I have no chiyuv at all. What's the geder of a chiyuv to say Hallel b'diluk? We understand it's a minhag. So we say b'diluk. We don't want to say the whole thing. But what is the idea of Chol Hamoed Pesach? So we already mentioned that the Beis Yosef brings down that at Shvi Shel Pesach, that the reason why we don't say Shvi Shel Pesach Hallel, he brings down the Gemara Erechin, and the Gemara Erechin says that it's not mechulot b'karbonaisa. Then he brings down the Shepulei Hamleket, brings B'Shem HaMedrash, that the reason why we don't say Hallel Kol Yomei Pesach is because the Mitzrim were, there was Mitzrim Nitbo, they drowned in the Yam Suf, and B'nafal Vecha Al Tismach. Now, so first of all, it's very strange. Why does the Beis Yosef, not the Beis Yosef, but Shepulei Hamleket, why does it bring this other reason of not saying? The Alter Rebbe just brings the first reason. But the Shepulei Hamleket, why does he bring this second reason of not saying Hallel? The second reason why we don't say Hallel is going to fall Vech Al Tismach, when there's a clear Gemara that says the reason why we don't say Hallel. Why do we need to come on to this reason of going to fall Vech Al Tismach? Number two, the Chayro, when we say the reason of going to fall Vech Al Tismach, the Chayro, that's an explanation on the Shvi Shel Pesach. The reason why we don't say Hallel on Shvi Shel Pesach is because when a fall of Vech Al Tismach. So that we can maybe give a half an answer for why we need a special reason. Why we need a special reason? Because maybe as we'll get into, there's two different reasons to say Hallel on Shvi Shel Pesach. One is because there's a Yom Tov, and one is because of the specific miracle that happened there.
I thought it's only a Yiddish enemy. He says it's only Yiddish enemy.
Yes, so we'll get into that. We'll partially discuss it, although there is there seems to be a machlokes over here. So if you look in the Mefarshim, actually regarding Benafal, the Gemara actually, the Megillah brings somewhere Benafal B'Chatismach in regard. The Mordechai said about Haman. And then there's another Gemara, I don't remember where, that actually says it's Hahuba Akum Hahuba. It seems like it's already a machlokes in the Gemaras. So the Gemara says. So for that we can give a half answer. There's two reasons to say in Shvi Shel Pesach Hallel. One reason to say Hallel Shvi Shel Pesach Yom Tov. One is because of a special miracle. So for the Yom Tov, we have the Gemara Erechin that says that what's the reason why we don't say Hallel? Because it's not mechulot b'karbonaisa. What for the Nes, we need the Shibulei Leket that tells us that this Nes we don't say Hallel for. But if you look inside the Beis Yosef, in the Lashon of the Shibulei Leket, and in the Taz, he says it explicitly, he explains all the days of Pesach, including Chol Hamoed. What's the reason why we don't say Hallel? And he gives this reason. And the Taz explains, because it doesn't make sense to say Chol Hamoed Pesach and not say Shvi Pesach. So in order for the honor of Shvi Pesach, we don't say Chol Hamoed Pesach. So in other words, it's not only that we have two reasons why we don't say Shvi Pesach Hallel. We have two reasons why we don't say Chol Hamoed and Shvi Pesach Hallel. What's the two reasons why we don't say Chol Hamoed Pesach and Chol Hamoed Shvi? One is, the reason why we don't say on Chol Hamoed is because it's not Mechulot B'Karbonos. So another reason is because the Mitzrim, because since the Mitzrim drowned, and therefore that's a reason not to say also on Chol Hamoed, because it doesn't make sense to not say Shvi Pesach and say Chol Hamoed. So therefore, that's another reason why we don't say Hallel on Chol Hamoed. And that's very difficult. Why do we need two reasons why we don't say on Chol Hamoed? Chol Hamoed, there should be only one reason, because it's a Yom Tov. Why do we need two reasons to not say Hallel on Chol Hamoed? So we're asking, again on the Ramban, number one, the Ramban says that there's a chiyuv to say Hallel b'dilu. There's a chiyuv to say Hallel in a way that you skip. What does that mean that there's a chiyuv to say Hallel b'dilu? What's the pshat? What's the geder in it? Number two, we want to understand. The Gemara says clearly there is no chiyuv of Hallel on Chol Hamoed Pesach. Why does the Ramban say there is a chiyuv? Number three, why do we need two reasons that we don't say Hallel on Shvi Pesach and Chol Hamoed? Specifically Chol Hamoed, which is number one, as the Gemara says in Erechim, that it's not Mechulot B'Karbonos. Number two, because when a fall of the Chatismach. If the Gemara's reason should be the simple reason, why do we need a second reason? And if the other reason is good, why do we need the reason of the Gemara? Now the Marsha in Brachas asks similar to what Rabbi Yitzchak was asking. He says in the Gemara Brachas of Tessa says Kuf Gimel Mizmerim Amar David Tehillim V'Leimer Haluka. Actually, he said 103 Mizmerim until he didn't say Haluka. Till came to Baruch Nafshi and Rabam Aplasam Shurasharim Shamar Yitamcha Tamar Aretz Verasharim Medinam Baruch Nafshi Hashem. Till he saw the Mapol of the Rishayim. And then he said that Yitamcha Tamar Rishayim Verasharim Baruch Nafshi Hashem Haluka. So in other words, only once he saw Mapolasim Shurasharim, only once he saw the Rishayim completely destroyed, only then did he say Baruch Nafshi Hashem Haluka. So the Marsha says, first of all, that's difficult on the Shibulei Leket that says we don't say Hallel because Nitzbo Mitzrayim Al Yam. And number two, and there he also asks, B'chlal, I don't understand why the Shibulei Leket had to give a second reason when the Gemara says clearly. So the Marsha himself asks this question, but he says also there's the Gemara seems to say the opposite, that we do say Haluka. So understand the Ramban. Let's go back to the fundamentals of the obligation of Hallel. So the Rambam in the Shevish Harishon, he brings down the Bahag. But the Bahag says the chiyuv of Hallel is a deraisa. That's the chiyuv of Hallel. The chiyuv of Hallel is deraisa. And the Rambam asks him in the Shevish Harishon, in the words of the Ramban, how are we going to consider the Kriyas Hallel that David praised Hashem, that Moshe Rabbeinu instructed it? How are we going to assume that Hallel, which was said by David HaMelech, is a deraisa? That's what the Rambam asks on the Ramban. So we have the Bahag who says that Hallel is a deraisa, and you have the Rambam ask him and say for a mitzvah, how do you say it's a deraisa when from Moshe Rabbeinu when David HaMelech instructed it? So the Ramban himself asks, I'm going to ask on the Rambam. I don't understand your question. It's a whole arichas. He says the Rambam himself in Hilchos Tefillah says that that midaraisa there is a instruction of tefillah, beis Sarah, in the time of Sarah, and the nusach, a specific nusach, and the specific timing, that was Anshe Knesset Gdela Tiknu. That's the Anshe Knesset Gdela we're Misachim, as the Gemara says clearly. So what's your difficulty with Hallel? The Bahag means the same thing with Hallel. Hallel, the Ikar Mitzvah was said, just like you were ready to say that by Tefillah, why aren't you ready to say the same thing by Hallel? That the Ikar Mitzvah was instructed by Moshe Rabbeinu, by the Eibush Midaraisa. And the Nusach of Hallel was said, by Nus David HaMelech. What's the big difficulty? Number two, he asks that the Gemara Baba Basra says clearly that there is certain mizmarim that tefillah Moshe Ishalakir, certain mizmarim that David HaMelech gathered all the mizmarim that were said Baruch HaKodesh, including those that were said by Moshe Rabbeinu. And there's another 11 kapitelach that were said that were said from the Nevi'im earlier than David HaMelech. So why is it so difficult to say that Hallel was said before? And he says specifically, the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Kuf Tesvav Kuf Zayin says that Hallel was, at least there is a Amoraim and Tanaim who say that David HaMelech said it, but there is many Amoraim and Tanaim who say that Hallel was said before. Some people say Moshe Rabbeinu said it. So what's the difficulty that you're asking on the Bahag? That's what the Ramban asks. Therefore, the Ramban says, I say like the Bahag, the Hallel is deraisa. And why is it a deraisa? It's a deraisa. Either he says halacha l'Moshe Sinai, or it's a deraisa because of Simchas Yom Tov. That's just that because of Simchas Yom Tov, there's a din to be sameach in Yom Tov. And the Iker Simcha is in Shira, and the Iker Simcha is in the Shir and the Karbonos, and not only that's clear in the Gemara, and not only in the Karbonos, but rather even without Karbonos, there's a din mitzat Simcha Yom Tov to say Hallel mitzat that it's a deraisa. And he continues. If I'm saying it's a deraisa, why does it say in the Gemara Pesachim the Nevi'im Shebneim Tiknu that the Nevi'im were misakinits? So he says, the Nevi'im Shebneim Tiknu Loimar Al Kol Perek VePerek L'Divrei Chachamim Shenevi'im Tiknu Hanish Tiknu L'Chol HaPrakim U'Legeula V'Anisim Metakanos Nevi'im Shebnayim. The Chur, it sounds like they're misak and they're nusach to say it. That's what it sounds like. The Ramban. We're going to review what he says. So the Ramban asks in the Rambam two questions. So the Rambam says, the Bahag says that Hallel is deraisa. The Rambam asks on the Ramban, how do you say Hallel is a deraisa if it was only given by David HaMelech? How can you say that it was Moshe Rabbeinu instructed to say something David HaMelech says? And the Ramban says, I completely don't understand what you're asking. Well, the David HaMelech was Masak and the Nusach, the formula, but the actual instruction could be given by Moshe Rabbeinu. And in fact, maybe the Mizmerim was said before, but even though it was Malukah, it was collected by David HaMelech, but maybe it was actually said before. So what could you say? So this is there's a famous Brisker Rav that talks about a third Rambam. And in short, the Rambam says, the Rambam in Hilchos Chanukah says that the Hallel is a Medivrei Sefer. The Hallel is D'Rabbanan. And the Rambam says that there's a clear pasuk that says that it says Kriyas Hallel is Medivrei Sefer. It says the Ravid says Yeshua Masei Medivrei Kabbalah Hashir Lachem Kalelis Kadosh Achad. That when Sancheriv was besieging Yerushalayim. So Yeshayahu told them, and he gave them security that you're going to win, and you're going to sing to the Eibishter on this miracle like the night of a Yom Tov. This pasuk is the source that the Gemara brings in Erechin for Hallel. So you see that it's not just a derabanan, but rather it's medivrei neviim. So in short, the Brisker Rav differentiates between two types of Hallels. He said there is the Hallel which is called Hallel Medin Shira, which is a spontaneous Shira song that comes to the Eibishter that from a miracle, from an experience. And then there is the Hallel that's called Medin Kriya. Kriya, that's the language, the vernacular that it's called in Yeshiva. It's Hallel Medin Kriya. Precisely what Medin Kriya is, there's many different Purush. Everyone can have their own shnit, their own twist. But for now, we'll just say Hallel Medin Kriya is not Medin Shira. It's not as spontaneous as a Shira. So there's two Hallels. There's Hallel Medin Shira and Hallel Medin Kriya. When Sancheiriv told them, what Sancheiriv was telling them was that when you're going to win this, you're going to have the spontaneous Hallel, that you're going to experience the spontaneous miracle, and spontaneously you're going to sing a Shira. Just like Leilis Skadish Chag. What is Leilis Skadish Chag referring to? Pesach night. Pesach night is a different, is as my father spoke yesterday, that is when you're actually experiencing the miracle. So there is this spontaneous Shira verse the Yud Ches Yomim, the 18 days that you say Hallel, the 21 days that you say in the Geila, where there it's less spontaneous and it has a din kriya, and that's a derabanan. And that's a derabanan. So, for example, the Rebbe brings down, the Rebbe also brings down over there. Some people say the reason why we don't say bracha on the Haggadah is because we don't say, it doesn't make sense to say a bracha on a bracha. Just like you're not going to say bracha on Berachas Hamazon. You don't say a bracha, so the whole Haggadah is a bracha, so it doesn't make sense to say a bracha on a bracha. On the other hand, you do say bracha on Hallel, so what's going on? So I heard from my father, he gave an example for the first idea of we don't say a bracha on a bracha, that when the Bachim were going on Merkah Shlichus, so Rabbi Chassidic gave them instructions how to act like a mensch. He said, when you're leaving the house, someone hosts you, say thank you for hosting me, for servicing me. And so one of the Bachim said, but when they were leaving, Rabbi Chassidic instructed us to say thank you. So, what kind of thank you is that, right? Thank you means that I'm experiencing a thank you. So when we're talking about Shira, when we're talking about something that's supposed to be spontaneous, it doesn't make sense to say a bracha, and that's the Haggadah. When it's talking about Kriya, it does make sense to say a bracha. So you have there is you have the Hallel of Shira and the Hallel of Kriya. So it could be that's what the Ram. What is Hallel of Kriya? Not getting into that. Hallel of Kriya is to read, as we'll see. There's clear definitions in the Rishonim, is to read parshas of the Torah. Hallel of Kriya is just like there's a mitzvah of Kriya Shema that you're supposed to read parshas of the Torah. That's what Hallel of Kriya means. So it could be it doesn't make sense to have Hallel of Kriya unless something is already part of Torah, already part of the Kisvei HaKodesh. So that's why the Rambam said it makes no sense to say Hallel of Tehillim unless it's already part of the Tehillim, unless it already was part of the Kisvei HaKodesh. So what is the mitzvah of Hallel? The mitzvah of Hallel is a mitzvah of Kriya that you're supposed to read certain parshas of the Torah. That means it already has to be part of the parshas of the Torah. So even though there's certain paragraphs that were said Baruch HaKodesh before, but when did it get when did it get the stamp of Torah? When did it get when did it become part of the Kisvei Kodesh? That was only in David HaMelech's times. So it makes no sense to say the mitzvah of Kriya, the mitzvah of Kriya. So that's what the Ramban is saying. The Rambam is saying. The Rambam is saying, I don't understand you, the Bahag. You're saying Hallel is a deraisa. You're saying Hallel. Which part of Hallel are you talking about? If you're talking about Hallel of Shira, if you're talking about Hallel of Shira, so that's already part of that. You're supposed to say thanksgiving to the Eibishter. That's already part of the mitzvah deraisa tefillah, as the Rambam, the Rabbi Avraham and Rambam writes. If you're talking about Hallel of Kriya, the specific mitzvah of reading part of Torah, that only makes sense once it became part of Torah. Once David HaMelech made it part of Torah, so therefore it would make sense. And that's how both questions on the Ramban of the Ramban are removed. But al kapanim, the Ramban himself says, what is Hallel? The Ramban says the Hallel is a din simcha. And the Hallel on Yom Tov is a din simcha. And it seems like the Ramban is saying that so obviously according to the Ramban, the nusach of the Hallel is something that came later. So if the nusach of Hallel is something that came later, again, we're going back to our previous question, our original question. How does it make sense to differentiate in the foundational chiyuv between Hallel? Sometimes you have a chiyuv to say it b'dilug, skipping it, and sometimes you have a chiyuv to say it the whole thing. The nusach is not the relevant point. That's not that isn't the point. Is that simchas Yom Tov. How do you differentiate between some days that you're supposed to say b'diluk and some days not? Also, the question on the Ramban, who says that it's simchas Yom Tov, it's very it's a mitzvah of simchas Yom Tov. That's not the bracha. We're saying it's likro is the Hallel, to read Hallel. When they eat shlomim, when they eat wine, they say a bracha on the wine on the shlomim. No, it's just a hechi timsi to get to simcha. So it's very strange that we say a bracha likro is Hallel when the whole idea is to have simchas Yom Tov. So again, going back onto the Ramban, we want to understand what does it mean that there is an obligation to read Hallel b'diluk. How could he? What does it mean that there's an obligation to read Hallel skipping? How could he say that there's an obligation to read Hallel b'diluk when the Gemara says that there is no obligation to read Hallel on Pesach? Number 3, we want to understand that the Ramban Dach says that the nusach of Hallel is something that came later. So how does he say that how does he differentiate in the Ikar din of Hallel? Number 4, why do we make a bracha likra is Hallel if the whole Hallel is mitzat simchas Yom Tov? According to the Ramban. And also, we want to understand why do we need 2 reasons not to say Hallel on Chol Hamoed? One is because the Mitzrayim drowned, and one is because it's the friendship upon us. So why isn't one reason enough? So it would seem, again, when the Rabbanic says that the mitzvah is deraisa, so he explains if it's a mitzvah deraisa, why does the Gemara in Pesachim say that it's Nevi'im shebeneim tiknu, that it was from Nevi'im? So he says because the shahar lelanu haprakim lechol haprakim v'hanisim ula ha'asida metakanas Nevi'im shmai. That they instructed us to read it for times, for special occasions, and nisim, and for the future geula. That's when they instructed us. So it seems like the Ramban is saying that the Nevi'im, mid'oraisa, there was a mitzvah of Hallel for Simchas Yom Tov. The Nevi'im, not only were they misakin and nusach, but they were misakin a second din of Hallel. What was the Nevi'im were misakin a second din of Hallel? To say it on all special occasions, and for the Nisim, and for the Gula Asida. So there's a second din of Hallel that the Nevi'im instructed to say it for special occasions, Nisim and the Gula Asida. So it would seem that there's two dinim of Hallel according to Ramban. One is Simchas Yom Tov. In other words, what are you saying Hallel for? You're saying Hallel as a hechi timsi to get Simcha. As a way of getting Simcha. Just like the Ramban says over there, just like in the Beis Hamikdash, they did kalim, they did instruments to get Simcha, so too we're saying Hallel to get Simcha. As a hechi timsi to get Simcha. There's a second din of Hallel, which is the opposite. Because we are in Simcha, because we're in Simcha because of a Nissim and Prakim and different occasions, and Geula Asida, because we are an occasion of Simcha, Memela we have to say the Hallel. So there's one din of Hallel to give us Simcha, and another din of Hallel that comes from the Nevi'im that's the opposite. Because we are in Simcha, therefore we have an obligation to say Hallel. So it seems like according to the Ramban, this din, because we are in Simcha, we have to say Hallel, that din would be every single day of Pesach. It wouldn't be every single day of Pesach, we are in Simcha, so therefore since we are in Simcha, to give us the Simcha, for the din de'araisa, we're already yoitze with saying Hallel one day. Since we said Hallel one day and it's all one Yom Tov, with that, we're going to the mitzvah deraisa of Simchas Yom Tov. But then there's another instruction. There's another instruction from the Nevi'im that when we are in Simcha, as an expression of our Simcha, we're supposed to say Shira. In other words, according to Ramban, there's two dinim of Shira. One din of Shira is as a hechi timsi to give us Simcha. And another din of Shira, according to Ramban, is the obligation to say Shira as an end for itself. When we are in Simcha, we have an obligation to say Shira as an end for itself. And that is every single day of the Yom Tov. And that would be also on Chol Hamoed Pesach. And that would be in every single day of Pesach. So why don't we say it? So the reason why, so now we understand. The Gemara Erechim is talking about the din de'araisa of Hallel. What's the din de'araisa of Hallel? The din de'araisa of Hallel is because of Simchas Yom Tov. So therefore, the Gemara Erechim says you only say it on Yom Tov, you don't say it on Rosh Chodesh, which is not a Yom Tov. The whole din is because of Simchas Yom Tov. That's why you're supposed to say it. On Pesach, you don't have to say Hallel de'araisa. Why don't you have to say Hallel de'araisa on Pesach? Because it's already because you already said in Yom Tov Rishon. But then there's a second din of Hallel. There's a second din of Hallel which is instructed by, what's the second din of Hallel? The second din of Hallel which was instructed by the Nevi'im, which is that we're going to say Shira as an end bite because we are in a din of, we are in Simcha. Then we're supposed to say it every day, Chol Hamoed Pesach and Shvi Shel Pesach. Why don't we say that? According to the Ramban, so that the Shvuah Elokit says we don't say that because b'nafal avecha al tismach. And it seems like the Gemara in Pesachim says, what is the chefza of Shira as a full Shira? So the Gemara in Pesachim says that that says chamisha dvarim. And what's the idea of this Hallel? That's 5 things. You see it's Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsov, Matan Torah, Tchias Amesim, v'Chadei Shel Mashiach. What's the chefza of a full Shira? The chefza of a full Shira is that it mentions Tchias Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsov, goes on to Matan Torah, goes on to aspects of Tchias Amesim and Mashiach. Only then is it a full Hallel when we mention all of this. So when we're talking about Simchas Yom Tov, when we're talking about Mitzad Simchas Yom Tov, the Nusach doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what Nusach you say, as long as you're getting Simchas Yom Tov. But when we're talking about that, there is an idea of saying a full Shira. So what is that? There's a chetzo. What does it mean, a full Shira? What does it mean, a full song? A full song has all these 5 elements. Now, when we talk about Mapalasim Shal Rishayim, it seems like to answer the Marsha, when we say Hallelujah, we say, of course, we thank Hashem for Mapalasim, we say Az Yashir. The Moshe Rabbeinu said Az Yashir. But the full Chetza of Shira, we don't say it when it's when you have enough of Al Tismach. We say Hallelujah, like Rabbi said Berchanashi, we say Az Yashir. But the full Chetza of a Shira, which has these 5 elements, we don't say when it's Mapalasim Shal Rishayim. So now everything is answered. Again, why do we the Ramban's what's the we have two chiyuvim of Hallel comes out according to Ramban. You have a chiyuv of Hallel because that to give you simcha. For that is enough to say that that's one chiyuv of Hallel. Then there's another chiyuv of Hallel that because you are in simcha, you have to say Hallel. So in other words, what's the goal of the second din? That you have to say a full din of shira. You have to say a full din of shira. What's shira? How do I decide what shira is? Is it a zemer? Is it a sentence? A shira obviously has to have a framework of what it is. What's the chepes of shira? And the Gemara Pesachim says what's the chepes of shira. It has 5 elements: B'tzis Mitzrayim, Kiryas Yamsuf, Tchias Mesim, and Mashiach. So there is also a chiyuv to say shira from the Nevi'im. So on Chol Hamoed Pesach, why don't we say Hallel Gadol? Shvi Pesach and Chol Hamoed Pesach, why don't we say Hallel? So the Gemara in Erechim says, why don't we say Hallel? Because it's not a Yom Tov. That's the reason why we don't say the first Hallel, because it's not its own Yom Tov. It's all a hemshech to the first Yom Tov. Therefore, you already said Hallel. That's what the Gemara in Erechim says. The Shebulei Leket, according to the Ramban, explains, why don't we say the second din of Hallel? Since we're in Simcha, we should have a second din of Hallel. We should say a full Shira to him. Since we're experiencing Simcha, we could say a full Shira. So therefore, that obligates us to say a din Shira. So that's what the Shebulei Leket says, because we don't say a full Hallel. We don't say a full Chefza of Hallel when it's going to follow Vechal Tismach. We don't say a full Chefza of Hallel. But what do we say? That we do say some Hallel, just like David Abel said, Hallelujah. So therefore, we have a chiyuv to say Hallel B'dilu. Therefore, we have a chiyuv to say Hallel. We're skipping some paragraphs, and that's what the Ramban means. And Chol Hamoed Pesach, since we're experiencing Simcha, we have a din from the Nevi'im to say Shira B'dilu. We shouldn't say a full Hallel. We can't say a full chefza of Hallel, but we do have a chiyuv to say some type of form of Hallel, skipping some elements of it. So to end off, there we say what's interesting in the Gemara, in the very fascinating thing that Rashi in the Mishnah of Arvei Pesachim says what's the reason why we do Daled Koises, and he says that we do it because of the Daled Shana Shagula. In later on in Kuf Ches, when Rabbi Shua ben Levi says Daled Koises, that you're chayiv. He says that Rabbi Shua ben Levi says that Nashim Achav and Daled Koises she'afim hayu boisines, because they also experienced the miracle. So Rashi says, what's the idea of Daled Koises? Because Koiches Shapari, because 3 times it mentions that there was the 3 koises that Pari had on his head in the dream of the Shara Mashkin. Once Rashi already said the simple reason of Daled Shana Shgula, why does Rashi have to say the reasons of koises Shapari? So the Reb Tzaddik explains that over there, that context is to say about women, why women are chayav in Daled Koises, and why women are chayav in Daled Koises. Sha'af hamayu bois, and that's that Rashi says that they had the main part of the miracle. Why? Because even when it was in difficult galus and the painful galus, they still held hope, and they still held hope and wanted to have more children. They held on to the promise of the Geula. And really, we see in the Gemara Pesachim, it says, when did they say Hallel? B'shasha amdu aliyam, when they went down to the ocean, and they said, Lo ilanu Hashem, Lo ilanu, don't do it for us. And the Eibusher answers, Lamani esa. And the Gemara, other people say, B'shasha amad le'em haman. There's the chiyuv of Hallel could either be once you experience a miracle, or once you're completely confident and secure with a miracle that already obligates you in Hallel, as you see it in different places. And the woman who experienced, the woman who was so secure in the nest, in the promise of the Geula, so that's why we say Iker Hanes Hayayadim, because they were so secure about it. The main miracle came through them, and that's what Rashi says. Where do we see this? That's what Daled Koises comes to commemorate. That already in the Galus, you already see that the Geula, the beginning of the Geula. Already in the beginning, by Yosef's times, there was already the beginning of the Geula. There was that Hashem made the whole idea of Yosef being the Melech, all to bring eventually the Geula, the Daled Koises Shapari. Already in the Galus, you already see the spark of the Geula, which really takes us to the Shmini Shal Pesach, where we say where we're talking about the brachas that we're saying for the celebration, not the brachas, the celebration that we're saying for the Mashiach. Here also we see the idea of Hallel. The Hallel is not only for what we experience, but what we're going to experience.
Thanks very much, Rabbi Shochet. Tonight, 7:45 in B'nai Mona Chabad, there'll be a Kiddush Torah for the best and the brightest of the local and guest talents, as well as the Bachrim who came back from out of town. Tomorrow morning, after Shachris, we'll have also get to hear from the best and the brightest of the Bachrim. And Mr. Shem, we're going to good Mayed.